Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Ian. And I think the band's back there behind me. Thank you, guys. Oh, goodness. Well, here's the good news, guys. There's no joke today. Well, maybe I can think of a bad one. No, anyway. You know, for the last few weeks, we've been talking about the vision of Jesus and the mission of Jesus, how we're going to get there. And it really is more of a roadmap for us. It's not that Jesus is going to make it happen. It's not that this Messiah is going to come back and take care of everything and fix everything for us. Instead, I think what Jesus was doing is sharing with us a pathway that we could come to understand and start to develop. And so Jesus' vision, he said, was to create the kingdom of heaven, and I would add to it here on earth. Now, he said it different ways. He said the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And at hand was a terminology in Aramaic that basically meant that it is right here, right now within you. Another way it's said in the Scripture is that the kingdom of heaven is within you. He said that the realm of heaven, depending on which translation you read, the realm of heaven is here and now, and some are already in the realm. And so Jesus had this vision, I believe, of what we could become. Different than the vision of a Messiah as taught in Judaism, different than the vision of the Messiah taught in Christianity, I believe. And so there's a broader understanding of this idea of the kingdom of heaven being that vision. Then, and what we call it in Unity most of the time is either a spiritually enlightened world, or the one I like is a world that works for all. And Jesus had a way he was going to get there. He had a mission statement. We talked about that. And that was that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. This comes from Luke 4:18 through 19. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me, saying that the Holy Spirit, or the Spirit of God, and I are one. And he anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. Literally the poor, most people were in that day and time, but also metaphysically poor in spirit, which he spoke to in the Beatitudes. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives. What are we captivated by? It's our egos. What are we in bondage to? Our egos, our perceptions, our misunderstandings, our incorrect teachings. And they're not negative, it's just that they are incorrect. And we're learning to move through those and let go of those. And he said, and recovery of the sight to the blind. You know, when he healed the blind, he said, now go and be who you are. That's the literal translation. Now go and be who you are. Filled with light. And he was also talking about those who are blinded by thinking they understand the truth. That they got it all put together, and this is the truth no matter what. And so he was talking about those who are spiritually blind, and he said to set at liberty those who are oppressed. And that's pretty literal. There are people who are oppressed, even today. There are people who need freedom from that. Some of you may feel oppressed, and you need freedom from that. And let me just say that it's here. And so, in his vision and his mission, he stated what Buckminster Fuller's phrase was, to see a world that works for everyone with no one and nothing left out. Charles Einstein said that we are creating the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. Isn't that kind of cool? And then the Pachamama Alliance, which is a peace organization, says we are creating an environmentally sustainable, socially just, and spiritually fulfilling presence on the earth. And the question becomes, is that mission not only possible, has it taken place? Jesus' mission and vision. Is it here? And certainly the answer is not totally. But remember, it's moved a long ways. When Jesus was walking on the earth in Israel, he was talking to people primarily who were undereducated. Most were hungry. Most were very poor. It was a barbaric world that he lived in. In 1 week in Jerusalem, 2,000 people were crucified, and you walked along the streets, and that's what you saw. And thank God that's not what we're seeing today. So the world has changed, but has it changed enough? And most of us would say, no. You see, what we're living in, I think, is a breakdown so we can have a breakthrough. Communications has helped us understand what is breaking down. It's more clear to us. Now, we all have different opinions as to what's breaking down. Some would say it's really building, and some would say it's not, but that's not important. What we are seeing is things that are breakdowns in society, in norms, breakdowns in the way in which we treat one another, breakdowns in our political world, breakdowns in our understanding of what we're here for. And what I believe that does is it's bringing us to our breakthroughs. You can never have a breakthrough unless you go through a breakdown. And so as we start to understand that, we start to see what our opportunities are. We begin to think, maybe it's possible. Maybe it's just possible that we can create a world that works for all. Maybe it's possible that it can get better, at least. Most everybody, I think, has that hope, that it just gets better. So there's that possibility of it getting better. There's that possibility of it breaking through. There is that possibility that tomorrow will be better than today. And I really believe, as most of you know now, that that is what's happening, that we are moving into a new world. We're moving into a way in which we communicate, in which we connect, not only by words, but psychologically, we connect emotionally, and we connect spiritually as we move along. A few years ago, nobody would have believed that we could live stream services. And last week, Google Analytics said that we had approximately 197 people watch the service, the whole service, and that we had about 400 people who watched for 10 minutes or more. Now, I don't know which part they watched, or maybe they watched for 10 minutes and then said, that's enough of that, and cut me off. I don't know. But they watched for 10 minutes or more. So the point is that we are communicating more to people than we ever had before. And certainly by the time we get into the 4th and 5th generation of the internet, what they're saying is that everybody in the world, the poorest of poor, the richest of rich, will be connected together on the internet. Everybody will have access, immediate access. Just think of that change. We're doing pretty good now. But just think of that change and how it starts to bring us together as we understand and care about one another. And so, in a book called Creating a World That Works for All, Abdullah Sharif, it's a great book, he talks about some of the things that need to change. But more importantly, he talks about how do we change that. And he says, as just about every author I've read, that love, number one, is the key. Unconditional love. Not conditional love, but unconditional love. He says, number two, inclusivity is the key. That we have to include everybody in our dream, not just a few. And he says also that what we have to do is be willing to be uncomfortable in order to make the change take place, or have the change take place. We can't make anything happen, but we can participate in what happens. And as he talked about this in his book, he talked about two types of folks that are in the world today. One is what they call a breaker. The other is a mender. Now, a breaker is an individual who is living in fear, who takes what looks like great action sometimes, something you and I would agree with, but they do it out of fear. And what they do is they put their thinking into the idea of the other person. You know, those people out there? That other person? And so what happens is they get wrapped up in that, and they think those people are going to hurt them. They think those folks have ideas that are not beneficial to anybody. And so therefore what you do is you crusade, you work against them. And that creates resistance. And that creates polarity. See any of that today? Yeah. So what we have to learn to do is not be a breaker, but be a mender. The breaker is other-oriented, sees another person as separate from them, sees the world and other countries as separate from them. A mender is inclusive in nature and shows up in order to support a cause and hope to bring in that cause without blaming anybody else. You let go of the blame, you let go of the shame, and you step forward and say, this is something we can do. You know, I think maybe in the next, here we go, wait a minute. Sorry, guys, the ear moved. Anyway, if that's possible. Anyway, what has happened, I believe, is that in the near future, they're going to look back, or the far future, and look at the year 2017, 2018, and they're going to say that was the year that marches came back in. Okay? That nonviolent resistance, nonviolent communications, passive resistance, however you want to use, came back in. And some of it has not been nonviolent, some has turned to violence, but that's when we have this idea that this person I am against. Not only their idea, but the person themselves. And we characterize them that way, and so therefore we create this void. And what we learn to do as menders is to understand that another person has an opinion, and it's different than mine, but it's okay. I'm going to give you an example, and I'm not taking a stand one way or the other. But let's say that you are a person who is totally against guns, no matter what. Nobody should have a gun in this country. And let's say that you've got a friend who is an active member of the NRA. And because they're an active member of the NRA, you decide you're not going to talk to them. You're not going to communicate with them because they're against your thought. Now see, that is a breaker. If you are a mender, what you do is say, I need to chat with that person, not to change their mind, just to have an honest dialogue so I can understand where they're coming from. Maybe I'll learn something from it. Maybe they might learn something from it, but there's no guarantee to that. And that's not what I'm doing it for. I just want to communicate and let them know that even though they have a different idea, I love them totally and unconditionally. And so we as menders can make a difference in this world. And we are doing that step by step. A number of years ago, in the 90s, there was a program that came about, and children in many countries were dying because they were dehydrated and they had diarrhea. And what would happen is they would give them water to hydrate them, and that would speed up the process of dying. And so the water didn't have the chemical balance it needed to stick, if you would, in the person's body, to be absorbed by the person's body. And what was invented was a water dehydration packet. And when you put that packet in the water they took, the water then was able to be absorbed by the body, the skin, the organs in the body, and the children lived. And more of that is available today. That is a thing just about of the past. So, a water dehydration packet. What I would suggest today is that what we need is a spiritual dehydration packet. That we need to relook at our spiritual thoughts. We need to transform from being a mender or breaker to a mender. And we need to eliminate fear and instead bring in love. Love is the most powerful thing of all. We need to be inclusive. We need to continue to believe in oneness to the point they're willing to do something about it, not just talk about it. And so what happens is that as a transformer, okay, then I am going to make a difference in the world, not by marching, and that might be one of the ways I do it, not by speaking, and that might be one of the ways you do it, but just by being in this idea that I am not separated from anybody. Now, that's kind of easy to do on Sunday mornings here, okay, because we have great people. We have people who love each other, care about each other. There's not much judgment that I'm aware of. Once in a while I hear something, but not much judgment I hear of. It really is a wonderful place to be and to grow and to understand the power of who you are and what you are. But when we get out in the world, on Monday, it might change. And so what we have to do is be that spiritual dehydration packet, okay, that creates a situation where I am in spirit, as spirit, knowing that spirit is guiding and directing me. And the way we do that is through prayer and meditation. The way we do that is by being conscious of how I am showing up in the world and not how others are showing up. We let go of the other complex and pick up the idea of inclusiveness, and we're all together in this. Anything I do affects you. Anything you do affects me and affects actually the whole world. That's a responsibility we have, to step forward and say, I want to be that mender. I want to be that person who says yes, yes, yes to a world that can work for all. And the power we use to do that is the power, all of them, but the power of imagination in particular. Power of imagination basically says that what happens is that you and I, when we stop thinking too quickly, allow a new thought to come in that gap that we've created. And when that new thought comes in, we are able to then take that, and it is a divine thought. And everything starts as a divine thought, by the way. We just get in the way of it sometimes with our interpretation. And so we have this divine thought, and let's just say a divine thought creates other divine thoughts, and all of a sudden we can daydream, we can imagine what it is that can bring peace and joy and happiness to my life and to the life of all on planet Earth. We can do that. It's through the power of imagination. But what do we imagine? Here's what one person wrote. Imagine a world where every belly is full, every head has a safe roof above it, every hand is held, every heart knows love. Imagine a world where there is only peace, compassion, inclusion, acceptance, and love. Imagine a world where health care and education are free to all who need or want it. Imagine a world where every being knows their innate worth, value, wholeness, and magnificence. Now, that's not hard to do. To accomplish, it takes a little more. But things are so much better today, and they're getting better and better and better because we're having more and more and more breakthroughs. There are more menders out there than there are breakers. The breakers get the news, though. But there are more menders than there are breakers. And remember that as we have that imagination, use that imagination, it transforms our beingness. Transformation does not negate what has gone before it. Rather, it fulfills it. Creating the context of a world that works for everyone is just not another step forward in human history. It is the context out of which our history will begin to make sense. Doesn't it make sense to live in a world that is safe for everybody? Doesn't it make sense to be that mender, that person who is inclusive and brings people together? Doesn't it make sense to dialogue with people whose opinions we don't agree with? Doesn't it make sense to honor people of all faiths, all religions, including the atheists? Doesn't that make sense? Because you see, it's then that we understand each other, and I believe when we understand each other, we will create a world that works for all. Thank you.